Let's get some analysis right now, though, of this historic meeting between Anthony Albanese and Xi Jinping. Let's bring in Michael Shoebridge. He's from Strategic Analysis Australia. Michael, thanks for your time, as always. Let's start, before we get to the Albanese meeting, the Biden meeting, 3 hours last night. What was your read on that and the outcomes?
Well, it's a little bit like the meeting we're about to see. It's good news to have Biden and Xi look each other in the eye in the same room, but also underneath are some real structural problems. So the big outcome for me was when Biden said there's no need to have a new Cold War. So what he's saying is there's the prospects of having one, but if China and US want to avoid one, there's still hope to do that.
And when you look at the fact that it went for 3 hours, the fact that it was blunt from all reports, the White House saying that the president raised a whole heap of issues, including on Taiwan, that the coercive and increasingly aggressive behaviour from Beijing is undermining peace and stability and jeopardising global prosperity. It seems like they were very frank with one another.
I think they were, but I don't think either of them moved. So Xi continues to say Taiwan is mine, it's nobody else's. No one else gets to make a choice here. Do not have senior US politicians visit because that will be provocative. And Biden in response said US policy on Taiwan hasn't changed. There should be no change to Taiwan's status by force. So they're not resolving it, but they're being honest with each other.
I spoke to Richard McGregor from the Lowy Institute earlier. He said it was positive in that maybe they're starting to rebuild the foundations of the relationship, but it's not transformational at this point. Would you agree with that?
I would. This is not a Nixon goes to China moment. It's really a calming of the tension, and I think it's showing that Xi, in his new term of leadership, wants to take some of the international complication out of China. He's got enough domestic economic trouble, and he wants less trouble internationally. That's good news.
The world is big enough, apparently. This is what Xi's foreign ministry spokesperson, who was in the meeting, he says, the world is big enough for the two countries to develop themselves and prosper together. That was the message that this advisor sent out.
I think that's a little overly optimistic because the world's big, but US and China are technologically entangled, and it's that competition in the digital world. We've seen it with Biden's CHIPS Act to reduce China's accelerated growth in its digital capability. That's where the real tension is, along with Taiwan. Neither of those problems is going away.
Are you encouraged by the fact that the two leaders have tasked senior officials to maintain communication and, in the words of the White House, to deepen constructive efforts?
I am. I think the US and Biden was always open to this. It was Xi and his Chinese Communist Party officials that weren't. So this is a signal that Xi knows he hasn't got a completely free hand. And maybe that's hopeful in this next term of his leadership.
And so you spoke about the domestic challenges for China. Is there maybe a normalising happening here? Potentially, is this the start of a normalisation of China's relations with the region?
I think China is still on a track of centralising more and more control in the person of the leader, Xi, and the party. And that won't be a normal relationship with the rest of the region, but it will result in a lower growth China. So the high growth era of China is over under Xi. A low growth China is a different problem for him to manage, and it may be an easier problem for the rest of us.
One of the things that there's two other things we should touch on. First of all, Ukraine, and then I want to get your thoughts on North Korea. But Ukraine, China was almost taken by surprise, do you think, in the way that Russia, with its flagrant invasion and behaviour, has put China in a difficult, and the Chinese leadership in a difficult position. Is that right? Well,
there's some reporting from unnamed Chinese officials that Putin didn't tell Xi in his meeting 3 weeks beforehand that he was going to invade Ukraine. I actually think it's a simpler, uglier problem, which is Xi would have been perfectly happy if Putin had conquered Ukraine quickly, because it would have empowered him in lots of ways, including to use force against Taiwan. So the fact the war is turning out so badly for Putin is the problem for Xi. But they've still got a deep strategic partnership, and Xi is not going to step away from Putin.
And then you've got that other volatility on the Korean Peninsula. So that's the one where no one can predict where that goes. How do you see the North Korean volatility? Where does it fit in that US-China picture?
I think the big effect there is it's giving South Korea and Japan a strategic reason to cooperate that they can talk about when they don't like saying another reason is China. So Kim Jong-un is actually enabling a much tighter South Korea-Japan relationship, and that's all good for US allies in the region. But the big problem is Kim's not getting the attention he wants, so is he going to conduct nuclear tests to try and get that?
And finally, the White House statement said that leaders agreed a nuclear war should never be fought and can never be won, and underscored their opposition to the use or threat of use of nuclear weapons in Ukraine. So some agreement there, but apparently no mention of that in the Chinese statement.
No, and really Beijing is still building nuclear weapons as fast as is physically possible. And they've always seen opacity about how they'd use them as a strength. So I take their words with a great dose of salt.
Michael Shoebridge from Strategic Analysis Australia, great to see you. Appreciate your insights. Thank you.
Thanks, Kieran.